Hey guys, Yves here, and I'm with Calvin, who's going to be teaching with us this spring term.
Of course, yeah. So as Yves said, my name's Calvin Leung. I am by profession, I guess what we would call like an animation artist right now, largely storyboarding, but I started out as a writer in animation and live action. And I guess, just in terms of doing this particular recording, kind of podcast style interview slash conversation, it was something that, Yves and I had talked about, you and I had talked about of just letting the Frame Point studio community get to know us a little bit more, even just like how we first met and also the intention behind the classes. So for me, like when I'm working on, boards or animation, it's always fun to listen to stuff, with audio podcasts. So I thought that this might be something the students or members of the community might benefit from. So it's very unscripted, very conversational.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of what we're going for. I'm sorry, I might have gone off track.
No, that's
We were talking
perfect.
about like background. So yeah, I'll just mention like really quickly, how I met you, Yves, was, and this is more for the students because obviously both you and I know how we met, but we
Mhm.
met in 2017, and this was in Los Angeles at the Concept Design Academy, brick and mortar school that's, in Pasadena. And you're teaching a class with Patrick, right? Patrick Balceros, the Viscom slash dynamic drawing or
Mhm.
dynamic sketching is I think what CDA called it.
Yeah.
And that was actually technically my very first art class, like official art class. I had never taken any kind of art class in high school or like college. I actually did attend art center for 2.5 years, but I was not in any drawing related track. I was actually in the film department, which you actually don't need to do any drawing. You just work with cameras. We had to actually do an acting class, which was a whole different thing. But there was no drawing. It was all live action filmmaking based, so never any kind of sketching class. So it's funny when I mention that because when people say like, "Oh, you went to art center, so that means you can draw." I was like, "Oh no, I actually never took one drawing class at art center at all. I kind of like went under the radar." But our meeting at CDA Concept Design Academy, I think, was very fortuitous, and it definitely was a time when I think there was a lot of energy around arts education and the animation industry, the entertainment industry because of streaming, so there was a lot of, work that was flowing. But so we met at Dynamic Sketching, and that was spring of 2017. And I think around the same time I was taking the analytical figure drawing class from Kevin Chen. So both classes being very heavy homework. Uh, I had to learn how to manage my time while also working a day job, which at that time I was actually working in production management at DreamWorks Animation. So that day job gave me the flexibility to take the night classes at CDA. And my supervisors at that time were very supportive of that. So
Yeah, and you
that's kind of
were
how we met.
yeah, and that was all full time, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that's definitely
yeah,
something try to solve how
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
manage that balance.
And I think everyone's, I mean, this is probably the typical disclaimer. I think everyone's situation is going to be different,
Right.
because you have different life situations, life stages, circumstances. I can speak specifically to my own at that time, where before I started going to CDA, I'd done some research beforehand, not only on the school, but just what it would take to go to school at night and build a portfolio. So I would say as far back as summer of 2016, that's around the time that I started sensing, okay, um, I'd like to move in this direction of becoming a visual artist, in animation, but I need to really get a sense of what discipline, what focus, right? So, um, what I did was because I had the access to working at an animation studio, I was already around a lot of other professionals who had a lot of experience, a lot of years of experience. And so I talked with them one-on-one, and just got that insight of like, okay, well, what are the possible jobs, right? And then what would it take to move towards that? And there's a lot of recommendations of, oh, you should go to Concept Design Academy. That's the school in Los Angeles, in the Pasadena area, where there's a lot of focus and, you get a very intense strong education worth the money that you're putting into as well as the time. Because, you know, the teachers, the community around it are very much connected to the industry. Um, so the other aspect of it too, kind of getting back to your question, was time management and figuring that out. And so part of the time management was whittling down I guess you could say a blueprint or a game plan, you know, that would lead somewhere, right? So I didn't go into CDA with necessarily, you know, a blue sky, all roads are possible. It was more that, okay, I'm going to focus on the storyboard artist track because that seems to be the one that also incorporates previous skills that I had attained. So what that means is, well, first of all, going to Art Center for 2.5 years, I had experience with live action filmmaking. So I understood cinema, cinematic language, editing, directing, acting, that kind of stuff. So that aspect of visual storytelling, except no drawing, right? Just working with cameras, working with story. The other aspect was when I came out of Art Center, actually it was during my what is called like I guess it would be the equivalent of like your junior year in a four-year college, but I think it was probably like the fifth or sixth term. I started doing internships and doing the internships. One of them landed me at Nickelodeon Animation Studios, and I actually became an intern for a writing team on a preschool show. And so that was really important to start doing before I graduated. And then while I was doing the internship, which initially was just for I think 3 to 4 months, but it ended up multiplying into like a year or technically like 6 to 9 months, or adding a couple more months to it because I kept on essentially reapplying and extending my time on the show, and they liked working with me, and I liked working with them. The reason why I'm mentioning that is because that helped me at that point in time to think about like, oh, I should become a writer, right? You know, I know how to think, analyze. I can't draw because I wasn't drawing at that time. This was before CDA. So let me pursue becoming a writer because I'm learning from these writers, you know, first person in the writer's room. So I know I'm skipping a little bit around with like history here and there, but going into CDA now in 2017, so I had this experience with Art Center with filmmaking on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I had this writing experience because I was working as a junior level writer and also a script coordinator. And that means you are like an assistant to the high level writers, but you also have the opportunity to write and learn and move up from there, which I did. So if I have an understanding of filmmaking and I have an understanding of writing, those are two things that I could bring into storyboarding. I had noticed that a lot of the storyboard artists who were working on shows that I was working on, whether as a writer or later as in production management, many of them came more from an illustration background. They didn't necessarily come from a film background first. So they were, you know, very masterful and talented with drawing, but the filmmaking aspect, they were trying to learn that. The writing aspect, they were trying to learn that, you know, on the job. So for me, it's like I had all the other things, but I just didn't have the drawing part, right? And so going into CDA, once again, talking about time management, it was more about focusing in on a certain track and realizing, okay, storyboarding is the one that I should focus on rather than, let's say, becoming a visual development artist or a character designer, because my cinema skills and writing skills could be fused into the storyboarding aspect because storyboarding is pretty much filmmaking, you know, in a pre-visualizing sense. So that helped me to make the best use of my time in figuring out what classes do I need to take, you know, starting off at CDA. And a lot of the board artists, board directors, or just artist professionals that I was around, they definitely talked a lot about, you know, having strong draftsmanship, strong drawing skills. So the dynamic sketching, obviously, I wanted to go to that. And then the other aspect of storyboarding is especially working with human figures, human characters, having strong anatomy. So that's where Kevin Chen's, you know, figure drawing class came into play. And I know, you know, both classes being a lot of homework, it's usually recommended not to take both at the same time.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, I want to give myself that challenge, and I think for me, knowing how I learn too is a big part of it. I think everyone learns in a different pace.
Hmm.
For me, I know that I need to learn by jumping into it and repeating it, and so even so I don't know if I told you this, Yves, but some of those exercises that you and Patrick taught us, even just like the circles and doing that, um, I literally did that, like after finishing your class, I literally did that for like 3 or 4 years every day, and I would go to
Yeah,
I would go
that's
I would
great.
go to I would go to Daiso. So that Daiso is a store in Los Angeles and is also in other cities right now that is Japanese, and they have more discounted notebooks and like stuff. So I would go to Daiso in my area. I would get like the dollar cheap notebooks, and then I would literally just every morning, just like working out in the gym, I would just do those exact same exercises that you showed us. Part of that was training my hand and eye coordination, my understanding of shape, understanding of form. um, but it was funny because I would also do that like during lunch breaks, at work. And I think some of my coworkers thought maybe I'd lost my mind. Like they would joke, like they would look over me and I look like a crazy person drawing circles over and over. But it was the repetition that really helped. Now I actually don't do those skills as much anymore because I kind of moved into more figure drawing every day, which I do every day right now. And so that is also really important. But getting back to what you're saying about time management, I think it's always a challenge because we we only have so much energy, and we only have so much time each day. And so I think it's really good to be strategic and honest with yourself about, okay, in this particular season of life that I'm in, what can I handle? And then what could I maybe push myself a little bit more into, but it's not too crazy. I'm not going to drown myself. The idea of thinking about what could push myself a little bit more, even just like 10, 20%, that gives you a challenge that you can aspire to, but it's also attainable. And I think
Mhm.
that's something that, so for example, like CDA, I didn't take 4 classes, at CDA. I only took two, right? Four would be too much, right? So that was something that I really had to be aware of. It does take a lot of sacrifice. I think, for me, I was very serious about going down this road and also knowing that I need to test myself. Am I serious about this? Am I willing to make the sacrifice? Am I willing to persevere in learning a craft? And it will cost, it costs time, it costs money, it costs energy, resources, other areas of life. I don't want to say other areas of life suffer, but definitely one would have to, I had to schedule things a lot more and allow some things to certain hobbies or whatever, maybe to kind of go on the back burner as I was focusing, taking classes. So I think knowing your limits is really important. Obviously, there's not going to be a formula for every person,
Mhm.
but that's kind of what worked for me. So I know I talked about a lot of different things, but just wanted to paint a better picture if that helps.
No, yeah, that definitely. There's a lot of advice in there. Great advice,
Yeah, no,
Calvin.
it's and feel free to jump in at any time. I know we're doing this sort of conversational style. It's something that I think it's interesting. There's a showrunner I worked with, and I remember he liked to ask artists or people who are interested in pursuing an artistic job, like what motivates you, right? What
Mm-hmm.
motivates you, especially when times are tough, when you are maybe faced with a job that you don't like, or you are given an assignment, that is not to your preference, right? And so it was really interesting. I think asking that question of yourself is very healthy because it allows you to look internally in your own mental, emotional, psychological makeup and really get a sense of, okay, why am I doing why am I pursuing what I'm pursuing? Why is it that I want to do art? For some, and I remember with the showrunner, he was saying that, yeah, some people say, oh, I just want to be creative. Or, I've been drawing since I was, a baby, that kind of thing, coming out of the womb. And whatever that reason is, I think that's something to be mindful of. and to kind of know as you're going through a training, process. And I think you know this too with visual artists, and I think this is true of like creative artists in general. We're always growing, we're always learning. I feel like always having that student mentality is really healthy. Even if you're advanced
Mm-hmm.
and seasoned, because that always keeps you in this place of continually learning, especially as the tools, change. The craft, there might be established foundation that you want to learn. The grammar, let's say, so if we're learning English as a spoken language, generally there's an established grammar and syntax, that you want to learn, especially if for people who speak a language where English is not their first language, right? They're seeking to learn uh, pretty much objective standards in order to communicate, right? There might be some colloquial slang here and there as they get more familiar, but it can be very tough working through periods of time where you deal with lack of motivation. You deal
Mm-hmm.
with maybe going after a certain job and not getting it, or you deal with, hopefully, this will not be the case, but like a physical injury or life circumstance that prevents you from, pursuing the craft. I think it's really good to know, okay, why is it that I'm pursuing this? And I think that can change too, as you go through it. But being very honest with yourself I think is a healthy thing. I think there are a lot of like mental, I think and this could be getting into other topics right now, but there are a lot of mental pitfalls that I think creative artists, creative people can fall into where they might judge their identity and their value based on their job, based on the artwork that they produce, based on the reaction of their work online, like from a social media crowd, that kind of thing. I'm pretty much opening up a lot of topics, right now. But I think that it's important because it touches on the fact that, if we know why we're doing something, it becomes a value that we
Mm-hmm.
can hold on to, that can be our guiding light. That might be different for different people, likely, right? But I think a lot of times the anxiety that we feel, the stress that we feel as we're navigating through the creative journey is because we don't know necessarily why we're doing what we're doing, or that's changing, right? Or we don't necessarily know the season, that we're in, season of life that we're in. And, it's almost a sense of like, I want to be over here, right? But I'm here right now. And that causes some stress because maybe I'm not ready to be at that, stage. I need to build, and lay the foundation before I get there, right? So, um, yeah, it's always different for every person. I'm pretty sure,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm pretty sure, with your experience and even in the class that I was in where you were teaching, I think every student came there with a different, I don't want to say different agenda, but different expectations,
Yeah.
and I think part of the challenge for teachers, instructors, mentors is to become aware of that and how to help the student along their journey in a way that makes the best use of their time, their investment, but also brings the best out of them. Because I do
Mm-hmm.
think that one of the things that I think I really learned by going and taking classes at CDA, and so I would say I was pretty concentrated taking classes 2017 into 2019, and then I became professionally a storyboard artist in 2020. So that was kind of a four and a half year process of continually taking classes. I think the first 2 or 3 years were more like really intensively taking classes, and then after that was more building the portfolio. But I learned a lot just by persevering, and I don't want to say it's like, oh, you don't give up. It's more understanding why am I doing what I'm doing, learning how to make adjustments along the way, learning how to navigate. I mean, one of the things that happened in 2020 that none of us could have foreseen was, COVID, right? And the lockdowns and, that really, the world changed, because of that. And after that, and the industry, the creative industries as well, entertainment industries. But just learning, I think, how to navigate, how to pivot. And I think that's something maybe a skill set that artists we don't really talk about too much. I think there are artists who probably talk about it in classes or on YouTube or whatever, artist tips, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, this might be getting to like other questions, but yeah, we're definitely in an interesting time right now where so many things are changing for animation, for live action, for entertainment, for gaming, for illustration. And I think a lot of artists are probably asking that question that I posed earlier of like, why am I doing what am I,
Hmm.
why am I doing what I want, what I want to pursue or that I used to do, if they're out of work, that kind of thing.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I'm taking notes,
oh,
and
really?
there's definitely going to be more questions. But yeah, Calvin's put together some really great questions that is definitely in a lot of my students' minds right now, and
Mm.
just talking with either former students or peers on Discord when we hang around and do some sketches together once in a while.
I mean, I can read the first one. It says, "Why is it
Sure.
valuable to keep learning an artistic craft with the current changes happening in the entertainment and gaming industries?" I think the insight that I would bring to this question, hopefully it'll be helpful, is that uh, it's so the one of the things that one of the reasons why I think it's important to keep learning an artistic craft, even if the end goal is not clear, right? Even
Hmm.
if, let's say, the end goal is tied to becoming a certain job or being hired for a certain job in an industry, right? Um, the I think it's a very valuable journey to go on because it is, and this may sound cliche in the words that I'm saying, but I'll kind of get into it deeper to hopefully flesh it out more, is that I think it actually really speaks to a person's character. And I think a person's character is actually what are what is at the root of all the decisions that we make
Hmm.
and how we perceive things, how we react to things. So a good example of this is if you played football in high school or any other sport, right? Team sport, but you don't necessarily play that sport now as an adult. Like you're not in the NFL, you're not in the NBA or playing for the World Cup. But a lot of people who kind of go through that experience, not everyone, some don't have, positive experiences, but I've met a number of people who have said, hey, yeah, when I was in high school or when I was in junior high, some of the best life lessons I learned, were actually through team sports. You know, it actually taught me um, how to be determined, how to persevere. My younger brother, he actually took martial arts and he trained in that. Especially like through college. And I didn't myself, but one of the things that, he talked about was how much it taught him about focus, right? And learning how to be tactical, how to be strategic, how to be very centered. So the artistic crafts, whether it's storyboarding, visual development, painting, drawing, those are not necessarily the same as like these physical sports, but I think art in this respect very much we can benefit by thinking like an athlete,
Hmm.
because we're constantly learning new things, moving towards certain goals, exploring, and then, learning how to deal with failure, learning how to deal with
Yeah.
you know, our own laziness, our own procrastination, whatever that is, myself included. So I think that the learning and sticking with an artistic craft is important because it actually does a lot for you inside in terms of your character, in terms of your soul, if I can, as people to say that.
Hmm.
And that's kind of stuff you actually can apply to other areas of your life, whether that is in relationships, in another profession, in another area of hobby, interests, whatever it might be. So I think learning an artistic craft too, when it comes to perseverance, when it comes to growing, is I kind of touched on it earlier, the student mentality. It keeps you in this place of humility and I think constantly learning, if you choose to do so, right? And I think there are some people in life, they may attain the things that quote unquote, the American dream, right? The house, the family, the vacation life, that kind of stuff, but they can become very complacent, right? They're kind of just coasting through life. Not everyone, right? I'm not saying everyone. Those are still good to value and pursue. But what I love about an artistic craft is no matter how advanced or senior you are, how seasoned you are, you're just continually learning, continually exploring and growing. And there's a joy in that. And I think a lot of people might lose that pursuit. They might lose that sense of wanting to learn, wanting to push themselves,
Hmm.
because other responsibilities in life may not align with that, right? And so the artistic craft, I think, you know, things I know that a lot of entertainment industry people might say like, oh, the current industry is going through certain cycles right now. It's a down cycle versus, an up, a boom cycle in the past.
Hmm.
And, none of us can really read the future, right? Predict the
Yeah.
future. But I think this is also a case of where when I realize something about anxiety and stress, and I'll speak to my own personal case, is that when I realized that I was trying to control things that are outside of my control, let's say the nature of the industry, the ups and downs, right?
Hmm.
That's when I realized like, oh, okay, I don't have control over those things, no matter what I do, even if I have like the perfect skill set, the perfect portfolio,
Hmm.
gearing my life, basing my life on getting this job and going down this one career track. That's not a very healthy place to be. What I can control are the things that I am deciding to do every day, whether it is to learn a craft, it's to grow, even if it's just a little bit, right? Even if it's just 10, 15 minutes a day or longer. Those are the things that I can have control over, and those things I can have a lot of peace about, and also joy in that. So I think art and the other aspect too is, and I've shared this with you, you've asked like before I went to art center, um, the whole nother part of my life was hip hop street dancing. Being in
Hmm.
LA and being in the popping scene, locking scene, b-boying. This is essentially the underground, street dance community. That also really taught me about like I didn't necessarily see myself as a dancer as a kid, right? I was not the person who was cutting it up on the floor, at the high school prom, that kind of thing. So that was not me. I mean, I actually got into it after college. And so that would, considerably be like sort of late in the game. But being in the dance community and learning and going down to Long Beach, which is sort of south of downtown LA,
Yeah.
in the heart of that community, at this community center called Homeland Cultural Center, where they'd have a live DJ and people would be practicing these sessions, right? And that really taught me about being being humble, learning from ground zero, and persevering, right? But also the joy of that, the joy of actually speaking a language. One of the funny things about dance is that most people think about dancing, they think about, oh, you see it on TikTok, YouTube, movies, shows, and that's all good. That's, and many of my friends have, been on those projects, those films and stuff. But dancers, when they're in that street community and they get into what's called the cipher, right, which is the dance circle, right, the hip hop terminology. One of the things that I remember was, and I'm still dancing today, but um, one of the things I really remember is like being in the cipher. It's a conversation, but without words. And I
Hmm.
remember like going to within the first year, actually it was probably the first 2 or 3 months I started going into the community. There was an event called B-Boy Summit in downtown LA at a club on Grand Avenue, which is, downtown Los Angeles. And, there's a huge cipher on the second floor of this club. And this is the first time I'm seeing, a huge gathering of dancers. Like I had already been to Long Beach, but now this was an international competition. So there's dancers from Japan, France, South Africa, Australia, Germany, South Korea. And I realized that, oh, so maybe it's actually highly possible not all of us can communicate in English, right? Because not all, the English might not be that great, but we can communicate through our dancing because we know certain moves, we know the feeling of the dance. And that was so exciting being able to jump into the ciphers, connect with other dancers visually, physically, but we're not using our language. And that's actually when I started to understand that, oh, this kind of dancing, this freestyle hip hop street dancing is a language. We're actually speaking to each other.
Hmm.
without using English or other spoken language. The reason why I'm going into that segue with that story is because an artistic craft with drawing, with painting, visual storytelling, it is a language. And we are
Absolutely.
communicating
Yeah.
with each other, right? We're actually talking to each other through our art, whether you share it in person or you share it online or some other platform, whatever that might be. Obviously, the quote unquote entertainment industry is one type of conversation that's happening,
Hmm.
because there are individual artists, teams of artists working together to create a product, something you see, you pay money for or whatever, or advertisers, are paying for space,
Hmm.
as something is being shown. Um, so I think that's a huge part of the artistic craft is, oh, it gives us the joy of being able to communicate and speak in ways that maybe we can't in our daily lives with the written language. Obviously, I'm not saying that writers, text-based writers, are not artists. Of course they are artists, um, but that's the aspect of the artistic craft. Why is it important, even if, quote unquote, it's not clear if I can get a job in this full time, right? So
Hmm.
those are some things that I would consider, insightful or hopefully insightful and important to anyone listening to this.
No, yeah, that's a well said summary there at the end. Just yeah, it's a form of communication, and
Yeah.
and a lot of times, of course, it's a form of communication that maybe is hard to express in words, right? Just like dancing. So, I mean, the fact that dynamic sketching, the original name is Viscom, which is just
Mm-hmm.
short for visual communication.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, it's definitely all that. And it's another great segue to this question. So I'll ask it, and I guess you could
Sure,
start
sure,
as
sure.
well.
Yeah, yeah.
So our second question is, how is storytelling important to our daily lives?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the most sort of direct way I would touch on that is that I think it storytelling points to our search for meaning, our meaning, whether it's the meaning of our own lives or meaning of experiences that we've had. We can think of like, oh, well, I watch Netflix, late, at night to veg out or gaming or whatever it is, YouTube. So yeah, there is that entertainment aspect, but I think deep down inside, the human race, right, has always told stories to each other to communicate, to figure things out, to connect, to remember, right? And so we've used different media throughout the ages, the thousands of years, or thousands of years, whatever. Um, and so with storytelling, even today, I think it's important because when we engage in it, not only when we receive it, like I don't want to say consume necessarily, but we're hearing a story being told to us or seeing it, or if we're crafting it ourselves, we're putting it out there, we're sharing it with another person. It's actually, I think it's actually benefiting other people, through the
Mm-hmm.
insight, because and this thing with like podcasts too, like you can listen to people who maybe have totally different perspectives, points of view than yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to accept everything that they say is the truth, right? But it's interesting to hear that, oh, okay, this is this person's perspective. I'm listening to it, I'm processing it, I'm also formulating my own thoughts about whatever topic, right? Probably very meta for me to say that as we're doing this, right? But storytelling, I think that because so much of our lives are, I think, searching for why, the question of why. Why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why am I feeling this at this point in time? Stories, I think, are built in a way, visual, written, musical, whatever, audio, they're built in a way that take us on this journey and actually add something to it, kind of illuminates something
Mm.
about our current condition. Now that could sound like very like high and mighty language, which is not my intention, but when I think about, let's say, filmmakers that I respect their work, writers that I respect their work, visual artists, I recognize like they generally come from that arena, right? Yes, they are expressing something personal to themselves, but they also are reflecting something that they have matured and come to know about life, about certain topics, whatever it is. And I think, the formats of that can change, over time. But I think storytelling in that sense, even, even in a business sense, right? I mean, this is very sort of like cold commerce type talk, but any kind of company that is out there trying to sell a product or trying to sell a service, any kind of advertising that they're doing, yes, it is grabbing attention, but ultimately they're trying to tell a narrative. They're trying to tell a
Hmm.
story about their vision, about their product, about how they want to engage with the customer and to add something to their lives, hopefully, beneficial. But storytelling, I think, is part of our way of connecting with each other. Even just people who are, I don't even say social media influencers, but even just regular everyday people who are not, celebrities. They're sharing things on their Instagram stories or TikTok, right, to tell a story. It may not be a 2-hour movie, but it's a picture, it's a short clip, it's a meme that is relating some kind of narrative about their lives because they want to connect. They want to relate that to others. So I think that it's just part of how we're made in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. You pretty much covered it all. And
yeah.
yeah, I just my main thing, my take on it is it's all around us,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not.
Yes.
It's again just a form of communication. Even if it's like, no, I don't tell stories or anything like that. I mean, just if you communicate with anyone, a family member, whether it's a positive or maybe negative experience, your day at school or work, um, or maybe a show that you watched, and even the way you're communicating it, trying to recommend a video game you just played, you are telling a story. You
Hmm.
essentially are trying to advertise like why they should play that game or why they should uh, watch that movie or why you just really enjoy it yourself. So we're all storytellers, whether
Hmm.
it's big or small. It's all around us,
Yeah.
and just any sort of thing that you can learn about storytelling uh, can be very helpful. Just in the same way where you're trying to learn a new language, even though we don't realize it when we're storytelling, uh, learning about it, you realize like, oh, this is things I'm doing. These are the decisions I'm making, and why. And helps you discover like maybe the why factor of, why am I doing this, or why is it that I'm trying to pursue certain things, certain goals. But yeah, it's all around us.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. Move
Should we
on
go
to
to the
the
next
next one.
next
Yeah,
question? Yeah.
number three.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, we'll take turns.
Okay,
We'll
sounds good.
yeah, we'll
Yeah. Very conversational. Yes. How
yeah.
do you okay, so the question is, how do you persevere in pursuing an artistic craft, and what are ways to keep growing? Okay. So yeah, I would say I definitely have touched a little bit on that already in my own personal journey, kind of defining the why. Why are you doing something, having that North Star, right? Um, that guiding value, which I think is really important. I think that another thing too, in terms of growing, I think another thing that's really helpful is having just this attitude of realizing like, I don't know everything. And it's probably impossible for me to know everything about said discipline, said craft in any point in my life. Like I'm always going to continue to be learning new things, especially with technology changing so much. But instead of feeling overwhelmed about, the many changes that can happen, right? In storyboarding, it used to be like doing, pen on paper, then Photoshop came in, and then Storyboard Pro, and then now Blender and all the stuff, and other tools that are coming into play. That can be very overwhelming. Like, wow, I need to learn another software, and that's gonna take so many hours and stuff like that. I think a big part for me is actually just enjoying, it's the joy of learning, the
Mm-hmm.
joy of learning. Like, I didn't mention this before, but before I went to Art Center, so Art Center was technically my second formal education years because I was in college and I actually was a biology student, right? And wholly, completely different thing. But that aspect of, I think, being a scientist or having the perspective of studying as a scientist, it always put me in this place of being curious about the world, about natural phenomenon. Why are things made in this way at the microscopic level, the human anatomy? Um, you know, different animal life, plant life, all that stuff right now. I probably would not do too well on a biology test right now because there's a lot of information I think I've forgotten, but I have to probably study, again to pass high school biology tests. Um, but the thinking process, the mentality of like looking at a particular problem, a research problem or topic, and then hypothesizing, understanding it from different perspectives, and then coming up with new solutions. To me, there was a lot of joy in that. It's hard work, it definitely is not easy, but it's something that I think, oh, well, if I want to pursue in an artistic craft, knowing the why is important, but also the
Mhm.
joy of learning is really, key as well. I think especially if you are someone who enjoys learning. So I think that's pretty key in terms of keeping growing. I think being focused though is also really important. Knowing once again how to manage your time, how to not get distracted with so many different things and never finishing like one thing.
Mhm.
That's the skill set in itself, whether that's like a project management self, ability. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and you basically said a key word there, curiosity. Always
Mm-hmm.
stay curious.
Hmm.
And the perseverance part, just again, you touched on it, like the whys and the how. One of the assignments that I would give in my beginning, like drawing class, for example, I have students make a collage of their favorite artist, uh, any of their own artwork, if they have any that they want to share. Old, new, doesn't matter. Just want to see what you've been up to. Then I kind of see where students are into maybe traditional media or digital, maybe a little bit of both. Some are maybe more focused on like characters or even just portraiture in general. And then the other thing too is I have a third section in there where I have students just share their general inspiration
Mm.
that are not even just, visual art related. At least, it's not directly, right? So it could be music, it could be hiking, any other hobbies, or it could be, I've had students, they're into like philosophy or history or a lot of tech. And then, later on, I let students know that that is not necessarily exclusive to art. And knowing your other interests in life will help you through your artistic and
Mm.
creative journey,
Yeah.
right? And, because I know like starting out, just like we all have, it's like, okay, I want to be a character designer, storyboard artist, or, concept artist. I want to work for Blizzard or Riot Games. But it's like, oh, competition is so tough. But we just kind of see like, okay, that's the character I have to make. This is the programs I have to learn. And then, it can be it just feels like a daunting road. But teaching online has also taught me and to let my students know that because everyone has a different background, different scenery, just like the fact that I'm teaching international, students, all kinds of students from all around the world, different
Mhm.
time zones, and you know, basically I tell them, don't take for granted what is around, your surroundings. Don't take for granted the experiences that you had in life because those are things that you could bring in to your art. So yes, there may be, let's say, uh, 10 concept artists that are all doing characters for maybe one big project. However, each and every one of those individuals will have their own history, background, and perspective on things, different hobbies. And a lot of the artists that I've come to admire, we can call them, I guess, some of my favorite artists or, the ones that I'm inspired by. And it's not just the art itself that I'm looking. It's like, oh, like Darren does amazing mechs, and this other artist maybe does amazing paintings. But what I do is I dig into like what are they interested in? Like I look up if they have any interviews, and or maybe on their websites they talk about things that they enjoy. There's this vehicle designer that I met, Damon Moran. Love his work. Does a lot of cool cars, spaceships, motorcycles, you name it. And when I met him in person, it made total sense that We didn't even talk about art. We were just talking about mountain biking, and
Mm-hmm.
the fact that he rides motorcycles, like the fact that he's so invested in that part of his life, as a, whether hobby or professional in that sort of thing, he brings all that passion into his visual artistic skills, and that's where things can get somewhat. I don't know if easier is the right word, but you can definitely persevere because knowing that art's a lifestyle, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and all the things that you have in your surrounding life can be fuel and inspiration or motivation to keep growing and to keep
Mm-hmm.
learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just add something really quick to what you're sh sharing about essentially taking different elements of your life, other interests. Those are the quote unquote, ingredients that I think make your insight, your perspective as an artist very unique, because you're going to be processing it and relaying it in your craft in a particular way that no one else could do, right? And so I think that's something that anyone who's a creative artist, human being, right? Whatever technical level that they might be, whether that's early or later, I think that the ability to kind of just be in touch with these other aspects of life are really important, especially in storytelling. Anything that's telling a story, because you're relaying things about life, even just animation, right? If you're dealing with a character animation, you are essentially, I mean, this is not anything new, but you essentially are an actor in that scene. And so you're a character, how they relate, how the character relates and, reacts, listens. It has to come from a place, I think, from within, that is informed by other experiences in your life. And it's very much true in writing, it's very much
Mm-hmm.
true, I think, in storyboarding, in any kind of artistic approach. So just want to add that really quickly. So,
Okay, I think we get on to the fourth one here.
okay.
I'll read it up. So, what are good ways for creative artists to approach online media, education, and community building?
Mm.
And yeah, I'll jump on this one really quick.
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
Where
yeah.
definitely just like what Calvin was saying, like tools change, and so does the landscape of social media. So if you're watching this video, maybe 5 years from now, maybe things are quite different. But at the moment, definitely utilize uh, things that are in your artistic community. Maybe you're following certain artists that they have their own Discord channel, social media, maybe some forums or a website. We have a Discord channel, and once a week, we group up and do a sketch jam. So we draw together, just hang out, talk about anything media related or just anything random, or maybe what we're actually drawing together. So we'll talk about that. And then back then when I was starting off, uh, there used to be this forum called conceptart.org. I don't
Hmm.
know if you've uh, seen that yourself as well,
Mm.
Calvin. Maybe.
Mm. I don't think I've
Um,
seen it, but yeah,
okay,
go on.
they're no longer around, but back then
Hmm.
that was the largest concept art community, or even
Mm.
just entertainment art community in general.
Mm.
You'll have a large mix of students and just people wanting to learn more about the industry. Back then, like today, it's ever most students I know, they want to work for Riot Games, for example.
Hmm.
Back then, it was Blizzard Entertainment,
Hmm.
and once in a while there'll be professionals in the forums and interacting with people pursuing the same things, and it's great to just be able to be a part of a community. And I know it might be a little bit maybe scary and daunting at first, but yeah, just be willing to maybe introduce yourself, or if you find an appropriate forum to share your work and maybe even get some feedback, or the other way around too. Maybe just be brave enough to give some feedback and advice to an artist that is maybe where you were a few years before, and you want to give a helping hand. So I think those are ways you can help build a community and be a part of it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, no, I think that's really great. And you had some really good, like, concrete examples of how to essentially, engage, with the online conversation, whether that's through work that you're putting out there, like original work, or, the educational aspect, community building aspect. I think, one of the things that, and this is, I think, coming more from sort of the mentality that I'm sort of personally drawing from. I kind of see the online connection, whether that's through social media, quote unquote, content creation, using Discord. I see it as, very much in the same way that you are, but I find joy in the experimenting. I
Mm-hmm.
find the aspect of, let's say, even just like YouTube. Yes, YouTube is definitely driven by algorithms, and there's certain trends and people go for that. Um, but there is really a wide open canvas of like how to approach things. Now there may be different quote unquote, data of like what is certain numbers, certain views, watch time, that kind of thing. Totally understand that. But even before getting to that, for me, I think that it can be very healthy to look at not necessarily like, oh, this is the way that things always used to be or used to be done, but looking at it like, oh, what is sort of a new way that I can engage with others, right? And what are ways that I can, whatever, level of artistry, craft that you might be, or whatever the interest is, just like a cook, putting different ingredients together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there may be something that, might taste bad if you mix them together, but there's a joy in experimenting, if you're just sort of freestyling and putting it out there. I'm kind of touching on a lot of different things, but one of the things that I remember about a hockey player I remember reading his book. His name's Wayne Gretzky.
Oh
He
yeah.
was very
Mhm.
big in the 80s and in the 90s, and I read a book that was, I think it was a biography. And one of the stories about Wayne Gretzky, and he's considered, I mean, many people call him the great one, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, hockey players. When he was a young kid, he was small for the typical kid hockey player size in Canada. But something that his dad encouraged him to do was to look at how can I strategically play the game in a way that no one else is playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of the things that I think his dad told him, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, is that Wayne Gretzky, as a kid, he would learn to go behind the other team's goalie's net. So he would be essentially, the goalie's there on the opposite team. Wayne would go behind him and then kind of, essentially juke back and forth. And then once he tricked the goalie to go one way, he would go the opposite direction, and then he would hook around and score. So that was something that I guess, kids at his age were not doing, at that time. And then when he was in the NHL, he was known for doing that. He was known for like taking the puck into the other team's area and then going behind the net because the goalie can't really, see that
Mm-hmm.
clearly, right? He has to kind of like, okay, he must be there. So if the goalie goes one direction, Wayne would pivot and go the opposite and then hook around and get the puck into the net and score. And so the only reason I'm bringing that up is because that was a really creative way of looking at things of like, oh, what are new ways to engage? What are new ways to play the game? And I think that that can be a cool thing with online media, with education and community building is that yes, there are ways that other people are doing things, and I think one can do that as well. Have the portfolio, have the social media presence to whatever's healthy for yourself, right? But then also thinking about, oh, just as I'm being creative in my artistic craft, how can I be creative with communicating that? To the world, to the online world, to the audience, however that might be. And I think that's something when, especially with YouTube, like YouTube is pretty much, integrated in a lot of our lives, right? Assuming you have the resources and internet and all that and technology. But there's just so much stuff on there, it can be overwhelming. But it's interesting just how the field of content creation has become so broad. Yes, much of it may not be healthy, and there's different discussions about that. But it's interesting that because of these devices, because of this technology, anyone can, turn on the camera, assemble things, assemble footage, memes, music, clips and make something and put it out there and engage in a conversation. Just like how, the artistic craft communicating is a conversation, I think this is also a conversation of how we connect online. So, in many ways, we're not limited by, even just as an artist, people that we know in person at the studio or the company that we work for or the city, the state that we're in. We're actually learning from artists on the other side of the world, finding out about their work, listening to their interviews. So it's this ecosystem that keeps growing and growing, which I find fascinating. So
No, yeah,
just sharing that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And one quick thing that you reminded me of, with the Wayne Gretzky sample.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but this an artist, I forget who exactly, but great gave great advice about how yes, it seems daunting to see the artistic field and it's like, oh man, it's like so competitive. But when you just focus on yourself and what you can bring, to the community, to the world of art, to the world of entertainment, then there is no competition because it's really you that you're competing with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing
Mm-hmm.
where you can grow and focusing on that. And yeah, once I took that advice, it just completely felt, less pressure in so many aspects. So when I would see amazing artwork on, something like ArtStation, or back then it was CG Hub, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, seeing things on ArtStation or Instagram, but instead of seeing it as like, oh no, it's like it's so intimidating, like I'm not good enough, but realizing, you know, that you're really just competing with yourself. When you see them now, I see it just like, oh, this is very inspiring. Like, uh, it inspires me to pursue what it is I like about art and, things, other hobbies and aspects of my life that I can bring into the community. So, yeah. So thanks for bringing that Wayne
Yeah,
Gretzky
and
sample
and and
up.
I'll just actually add really quickly to what you're saying before we move on to the next question. What you just said about like competing with yourself and enjoying that. That's something I would see in the dance world, especially
Mm-hmm.
with the, hip hop street dance. Some of the best B-boys, B-girls, poppers, lockers, they would practice and engage in competitions and battles. But ultimately, in the end, that's a very common theme. In the end, they're not really just focused on battling against an opponent, right? They're actually challenging themselves. They're in their own, I don't want to say that they're in their own world, but they're bettering themselves. They're seeking to improve. They're seeking to grow. They're seeking to risk and experiment and from there, grow even further. And I think there's a huge joy in that. So it's fascinating
Absolutely.
that for me, having been involved in like all these sort of different, I guess you could say creative communities, there's a lot of similarities.
Mm-hmm.
Dancers, animation writers, all this stuff. So it's cool to hear that.
Absolutely.
Yes. Should I
Yeah.
read this last one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
I
take
think
us home.
Yes, I think we've touched quite a bit on this, but I'll read it and maybe there's
Yeah.
some, little points we'll bring up. But it says, question is, how do we navigate the emotional and mental challenges of the artistic journey with respect to finding work, projects, and personal goals? So I do think we've talked a lot about,
Mm-hmm.
this already, kind of weaving in and out of the other questions. But if I were to add to what has been shared there. I think an important part of this is actually understanding rest as
Mm.
well, REST.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean laziness, right? It doesn't mean using rest as an excuse to procrastinate or anything like that. I think it's understanding that, yeah, I said this earlier, but yeah, we have limited time each day, we have limited energy. And there are times that we need to rest our mind, our body, our emotions, in order to reset, in order to clear the deck, in order to be our best in growing in the craft. So that actually is a really important point because I think that if someone is working a job full time, and let's say it's not in the arts, but they want to pursue something in the arts, that's the part of one of the earlier questions about managing time is understanding rest. It's not that because I do want to be careful with what I said earlier, where I was saying like I was drawing those circles, like every day
Yeah. No.
for like 3, 4 years. it could give the impression of like, oh, this is like a workaholic, mentality. And yeah, I mean, there are some amazing artists who, who go down that path and they really, push themselves in that way. I personally don't think that that's healthy for most people. Um, and so I think understanding what your limitations are, understanding what rest you need, but managing rest well, I think is important. Having that routine, that rhythm. And rest is not simply just sleeping or taking a nap. It could be other hobbies. It could
Mm-hmm.
be as simple as taking a walk or spending time with your family or whatever that is, your loved ones. Hopefully that's restful, but in the sense that, oh, you're getting your mind away from a grind of or perception of, oh, I constantly have to be doing this. I mean, that's why we need to sleep. That's why our bodies are made to sleep. And when we have a good night's sleep, good night's rest, we can be more productive. We can be more present emotionally, physically, mentally to whatever the responsibilities are for the day. So I think rest is something that maybe it's not talked as much about. I think when I hear other artists talking about like how to navigate these challenges, it's often about, being kind to yourself, maybe setting your own goals, whatever that. I think those are good too. Those are important. But I
Mm-hmm.
think understanding rest is really important if I wanted to add something new to that.
That was great. Yeah, I'm glad that
Yeah.
you brought that up. And then yeah, to add to this as well, uh, the fact that the question is navigate emotional and mental
Hmm. Hmm.
challenges. Um, I believe that this is basically what my students are trying to ask me when they
Hmm.
when they generally say, "How do I deal with motivation?" or "How do I
Hmm.
get
Hmm.
motivated?" And what they're really
Hmm.
asking too is, how do I navigate these emotional and mental challenges? Maybe it's a form of
Hmm.
art block, or just procrastination, or just not feeling like they're up to the task.
Hmm.
And of course, the stuff we've touched on, those are things that can lead to motivation and inspiration. But what I do want to add to it is not going through your journey alone. So
Hmm.
really try to be a
That's good.
part of some kind of community, and that might mean taking a class, joining a Discord, maybe joining a stream from your favorite artist. Uh, you know, the fact that on like YouTube, or on YouTube where artists are streaming once in a while, just join chat, and you don't have to. You can just kind of lurk, and just being part of that really helps out. But when you are ready to, let's say, take a class, be willing to, try to make a friend or two, and it usually just takes that one other peer, that other
Hmm.
friend.
Hmm.
Just making one friend goes a long way, because when you're feeling uh, maybe not as energetic, or maybe you're having a bad week, and it's like, oh, but at least you have that one friend that you look forward to seeing on maybe a Saturday afternoon at that class. Like that already is very motivating. And I
Hmm.
remember, uh, you know, Calvin and I are originally from the Los Angeles area, and it's notorious for horrible traffic. So
Hmm.
it took me an hour and a half just to get to Concept Design Academy. But the fact that I was motivated to see, not even just the learning part, but just also motivated to see people that I was starting to connect with that have the same, similar interest, uh, talk about art or just talk about other things. It was motivating to do. So that hour and a half drive, didn't feel like much, because, or even just the stress of everyday life, kind of melted away when, because I was looking forward uh, to being with friends at an art class, or in these cases, uh, now it's like on Discord, like going to sketch jams, and we usually get a uh, core group of people that will show up almost every week just to hang out and draw together. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah,
don't
and I'll
go
just
don't go at it alone. Is my main
yeah,
tip.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a really important point. And I think taking this aspect of not going alone, which is community, relationship, And then also what I mentioned of rest earlier, both things are really key to helping you become consistent
Mm-hmm.
in whatever you're doing. And I think that consistency is actually another high value. But consistency that is just done by your own willpower, your own inner strength and isolation, it's very difficult to sustain, and could be, unhealthy, in whether short term or long term. So I think having the community, having rest helps with consistency, that helps with navigating these challenges. Because, being in relationship with others who may be on a similar journey, whether it's a similar or different stage in terms of skill level or goals. It helps you to process,
Mm-hmm.
what you're going through, and you're helping others to process what they're going through. So I think that's a big deal. So yeah, those are good points.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. I mean, great questions by Calvin. It was, you know, fun talking about all these different aspects, and I have a lot more questions, and we'll maybe save it for a later episode.
Hmm. Sure.
But yeah, so if you guys are interested in knowing more about us, check out our website and also the classes that we're offering. So hopefully you got to know a little bit about me and Calvin as well. Any closing thoughts or messages you want to tell anyone that's out there?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I just encourage them to continue being curious and always asking questions, in their journey. And even if they're engaging with frame point, um, that whether you're taking a class or you're engaging in the Discord, I think having that curious mind is something I would encourage others to have. So I'll just leave them with that for now.
Awesome.
But thank you for listening. So,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Calvin. And thanks everyone that
okay.
listened to our conversation. So see you guys.
Okay. See you.